Let's move on from biological molecules and talk about energy. The definition of energy, the ability to do work or the capacity to change the physical position, composition, or temperature of matter. So there's a couple different types of energy that we really talk about and that we're really going to talk about in this class. And that's potential, which is stored energy. And that's what you're looking at here. This is the Hoover Dam. All the water stored behind the Hoover Dam is potential energy. Gravity is going to pull this water downhill, right? But by holding it back with the Hoover Dam, all that energy is stored behind that wall. It's not until we release that water or allow it to fall down the dam that it becomes kinetic energy. And this is the energy of motion. So when that water falls down the dam, it turns a turbine. That turbine is going to generate electrical energy, electricity, right? So potential and kinetic energy. Keep these in the back of your mind because it's important to be able to classify things as potential and kinetic energy. But what is the context of this in a chemistry or biological setting or environmental science, obviously? Well, let's take a look. Chemical energy is a form of stored potential energy. Specifically, if we look at a molecule of glucose, all those bonds, that is stored energy. When you break those chemical bonds in glucose, it releases energy. That energy can then be used to build up other bonds or do a bit of mechanical work at a cellular level. Most of the time, we take that energy stored in glucose and we move it to a different molecule called ATP. ATP is the energy currency for cells. That is where most of the energy is going to go that is stored in the glucose molecule. It's going to go into ATP, where it can then be quickly and more easily used to perform mechanical tasks inside of a cell. So ATP right here is an important molecule for cellular processes. So that's on a chemical level, on a molecular level. But energy is can also be seen and used on a much larger scale. So humans, obviously, we use things like fossil fuels. We burn fossil fuels and that generates heat. And that's one form of kinetic and mechanical energy that we use and harvest, but we can also use renewable energy such as wind or solar energy. The wind and solar energy, though, are much more diffuse and harder to harvest and harness as well, which is why fossil fuels were so important for so long. But now we're realizing that they're obviously not as good as we thought because they're slowly destroying the environment. So, big problem there. When we talk about energy, we also need to talk about the conversion of that energy, because taking glucose and turning it into ATP, that is not a one-to-one transfer of energy, okay? So the first law of thermodynamics, this says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it is conserved, meaning that whenever you convert glucose to ATP, all the energy that was in that glucose molecule is still present, but not necessarily in the ATP molecule, okay? So energy is only transformed from one form to another. Notice that I say chemical bonds and heat. So this is important. This is where the second law of thermodynamics comes in. When energy is transformed, less energy is available to do work. Some energy is lost as it is used. That energy that is lost is heat. So when we take glucose inside of our bodies, and we make ATP from that, a lot of heat is produced as a byproduct. That heat is lost. Most of the time it's lost. We can't really use it for much. In mammals, we have kind of figured a way to harness that heat that is a byproduct of our metabolism, which is what glycolysis, or the breaking down of glucose, is. And we use that to help make the metabolism, our global metabolism inside of our bodies, more efficient, because heat speeds up reactions as well. It increases the movement of molecules. So it's kind of a way we've bypassed that loss of heat and kind of used it for our own. This loss of usable energy leads to entropy or disorder. The second law of thermodynamics really only holds true in a closed system. The Earth is not really a closed system. We lose a lot of heat to the atmosphere, which is why there are so many things that appear extremely ordered. But if you look at these Mayan ruins, and these are actually in the Yucatan Peninsula, it is Calakmul. These ruins were built by humans, and they are obviously very ordered. But slowly, the jungle is reclaiming them, and that is entropy or disorder. This building, without energy being put into it to maintain the integrity of the structure, it will eventually fall apart, and that's entropy. So where does all this energy come from on Earth? Well, you're looking at it. It's the sun. The sun provides all of the energy, or the majority of the energy, because I can't say quite all of it, for life on Earth. But how do we harvest that energy? This is where photosynthesis comes in. Photosynthesis is the conversion of solar energy into chemical energy. We take sunlight, plants do that is, and they turn it into carbohydrates. One of those carbohydrates is glucose. So what does this reaction look like? Solar energy, that's our sunlight. Water, don't worry about the balancing act here, but water. Carbon dioxide, and that is going to yield glucose, which is a carbohydrate, and oxygen. This is important. This oxygen part is really important. Also is the carbon dioxide, but you'll see what I mean when I say oxygen is important here in a second. It occurs in two distinct steps. The light reaction, this is where water is split to form oxygen and other high energy molecules for use in the dark reaction. Those high energy molecules, one of them is ATP. ATP is going to be used to help create carbohydrates in the second reaction. The second reaction is called the dark reaction. It's called the dark reaction because it doesn't require sunlight, but it doesn't necessarily occur in the dark. So ATP and some other high energy molecules from the light reaction are used to make sugars from carbon dioxide. So this initial carbon here, C, that's going to be used to build glucose. So I'm circling this oxygen. Remember this oxygen that was produced in photosynthesis, because obviously humans and a lot of other organisms cannot photosynthesize. So how do we make use of the sugar where all this solar energy is being stored? Well, that's a reaction called cellular respiration. This is where we break down glucose to form energy for the cells, and it's more or less photosynthesis in reverse. You take glucose, you have some oxygen, and that's going to yield carbon dioxide, water, and energy. In this case, the energy produced is going to be ATP, and this is what an ATP molecule looks like. It's called adenosine triphosphate. It's actually made up of a nucleotide, which is a monomer of a nucleic acid, like DNA. Only this one has 3 phosphate groups stuck to it, instead of just the one, which is normal. So adenosine triphosphate, that's ATP. So in here I have the carbon dioxide circled. So the oxygen from photosynthesis gets used here in cellular respiration, and that's going to in turn produce carbon dioxide, which then is going to go back to plants. If you haven't already made this connection between the oxygen in photosynthesis and the oxygen you see here in cellular respiration, let me make it for you now. All the oxygen that we breathe on this planet has been produced by photosynthetic organisms. This O2 here is the oxygen that you breathe in, goes into your lungs, it's delivered to your tissues to perform this reaction. All the initial carbon dioxide on the planet was mostly from volcanic eruptions and other geological processes, but now a lot of the biological organisms are producing the carbon dioxide that is being used by plants. Unfortunately, now humans have upset that balance by burning lots of fossil fuels, and now there's much more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there was 200,000, 200 million years ago. Not all energy on Earth comes from the sun. Some of it, a very small fraction, can be derived from pure chemical breakdown, and that's what's going on here. So in deep sea hydrothermal vents, way down in the ocean, there is no sunlight, right? And so organisms down there have to find another way to get energy, and they do this, they acquire this energy through a process called chemosynthesis. They take carbon dioxide, water, and hydrogen sulfide gas. This is a very strong bond, and so when you break that bond, it releases a lot of energy. They take that energy and they store it in glucose, right? And they can use cellular respiration to make ATP from that. A byproduct of that is sulfuric acid. That's what this is. So this is a rare circumstance, but it does happen. Most life on Earth gets its energy from the sun. Even you can say, I get my energy from the sun, because everything that you've eaten, if you trace it back far enough, originally that energy came from a photosynthetic organism, or what we call a producer. So let's look at this in the context of a food chain. So, producers, these are the organisms that are photosynthesizing. They're taking solar energy and making chemical energy. The next trophic level up, primary consumers. So a trophic level is a level on the food chain. So the second trophic level, these are herbivores. These are things that are eating the plants. They are called primary consumers. They only receive about 10% of the total energy that was produced by the producers. That's what's going on here. 10% of 10,000, 1,000 calories. The next trophic level up, secondary consumers. They're going to only get about 10%. And the next trophic level up, tertiary consumer, 10% of that. Where does all this energy go? Well, remember that organisms don't just sit there idle. They burn a lot of energy in using their metabolism, building up their bodies, moving around, acquiring food. That takes a lot of energy. And when they do that, when they perform metabolic reactions, they lose a lot of heat. And so this is why there are far fewer top of the food chain predators than there are producers, because there's just simply not enough energy available to them, right? So at each trophic level, we lose 10%. Sorry, we don't lose 10%. We only acquire 10% of that energy. And we can see this not only in just natural systems, but also in human systems, in engineering. We lose a lot of energy by burning coal. A lot of that heat is just lost. We try and harvest as much as we can, but we can't always harvest all of it. Incandescent bulbs, for example, an old style light bulb that you would put in your house, burns a lot of heat. It gets really hot. About 95% of the energy in that light bulb is lost as heat. It's only 5% efficient. Cars, 75% of that heat is just lost. Only 25% efficient. As we just talked about, living organisms are only about 10% efficient. 90% of the energy that we produce is just lost as heat. This helps explain why it's a good decision to lower your meat intake. I'm not telling you to be a vegan. I'm not telling you to be a vegetarian. But the science supports this fact. You can feed far more people on just rice than you can on meat, right? Because you got to take all this meat and put it into a cow, and then you got to harvest the cow. So only 10% of the energy in the corn goes to the cow, and only 10% of the cow goes to the human. Whereas if you feed the humans just on that producer, you can feed many more people, right? That's where I'm going to stop with biological molecules and energy. The last little bit of class, we're going to talk about geology. earthquakes, volcanoes, and the rock cycle.